I buried my husband in his favorite Navy suit, but I wore burgundy, the color Kevin always said made me look unstoppable. At 58, I'd learned that grief doesn't require surrender. Sometimes it demands strategy. The funeral was everything Kevin would have wanted. Elegant, understated, attended by Chicago's most influential people. St. Catherine's Cathedral held nearly 300 mourners, all of them paying respects to Kevin Davis, the self-made real estate developer who'd built a $47 million empire from a single apartment building renovation 30 years ago. I stood at the receiving line accepting condolences with the grace that 31 years of marriage to a powerful man had taught me. How to smile through pain. How to project strength even when your world has fractured into 1,000 irreparable pieces. "Michelle, darling, you look remarkable," whispered Margaret Ashford, one of the city's premier socialites and one of my oldest friends. "Kevin would be so proud of how you're handling this." "He always said life was for the living," I replied, the words mechanical after the 100th repetition. But even as I played the gracious widow, my attention kept drifting to my son Brandon and his wife Sophie, standing near the back of the cathedral, like spectators rather than family. Brandon wore his grief like an uncomfortable tie, present, but clearly restricting. Sophie, blonde and sharp-featured in expensive black, kept checking her phone between appropriately timed dabs at dry eyes. During the eulogy, while the pastor spoke about Kevin's legacy of hard work and generosity, I caught Sophie leaning toward Brandon, whispering something that made my son's mouth twitch into what might have been a smirk before he caught himself. My daughter Alyssa, sitting beside me with her husband Ethan, squeezed my hand. She'd been crying genuine tears all morning, her grief raw and unconcealed. The contrast between my children couldn't have been sharper. After the burial, mourners gathered at my estate for the reception. I moved through the rooms like a ghost in my own home, accepting sympathies, sharing memories of Kevin, ensuring everyone felt welcomed. It was what Kevin would have expected. More importantly, it was what I needed them to see. Michelle Davis, composed and dignified in her grief. I was in the kitchen directing the catering staff when I heard voices from the adjacent hallway. Brandon's voice, low but confident, the tone he used when he thought he was being clever. "Finally, we've waited long enough." I froze, a crystal wine glass suspended in my hand. Sophie's reply came sharp and clear. "Your mother will need our guidance. She never understood the business side." "The $47 million should be split fairly," Brandon continued. "Half to us, maybe 20% to Alyssa, since she didn't contribute anything." The glass should have shattered. My hand should have trembled. Instead, something cold and diamond hard crystallized in my chest. I set the glass down with perfect control and continued directing the caterers as if I'd heard nothing at all. But I'd heard everything. 6 years earlier, Brandon wasn't always like this. The memory came to me unbidden as I stood at Kevin's graveside alone after the reception had ended, after the last mourner had departed with sympathetic platitudes. Brandon at 25, newly promoted to junior analyst at Davis Properties, bringing me flowers every Sunday dinner. "You taught me kindness, Mom," he'd said once, hugging me in our kitchen. "Dad taught me strength. Together, you taught me everything that matters." That Brandon had been hardworking, humble, genuinely proud of building something through his own efforts rather than his family name. He'd started in the company mailroom despite Kevin's protests, insisting he wanted to understand the business from the ground up. Kevin had been so proud. "That's my son," he'd told me after Brandon earned his first promotion on merit. "He's got integrity. That's worth more than any inheritance." But integrity, I'd learned, could be eroded like coastline, slowly, grain by grain, until suddenly you looked up and realized the landscape had changed completely. 5 years earlier, Sophie entered our lives at a charity gala, elegant in a black gown that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. She was corporate law at Preston & Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious firms. Impressive credentials, impeccable breeding, and a smile that didn't quite reach her calculating green eyes. "She's very polished," I told Kevin after Brandon first brought her to Sunday dinner. "Polished," Kevin had repeated, studying me. That's a diplomatic word choice. I'm trying to be open-minded. What's your gut telling you? I'd hesitated. That she asked very detailed questions about your estate planning for someone we just met. Kevin had filed that away with his characteristic silence. But I caught him watching Sophie more carefully after that, watching the way she calculated the value of everything in our home with her eyes, the way her questions about Kevin's business always probed for specific financial details, dressed up as innocent curiosity. But Brandon was in love, or what he thought was love, and I'd convinced myself I was being an overprotective mother, seeing problems where none existed. I should have trusted my instincts. 4 years earlier, Sophie quit her law firm 6 months after the wedding, a lavish affair that cost Kevin nearly $200,000. Every detail orchestrated by Sophie to broadcast wealth and status. I want to support Brandon's career full-time, she'd announced at Sunday dinner, as if it were a noble sacrifice rather than a calculated decision to live off someone else's earning potential. Brandon had beamed at her. Sophie's going to help me strategize about the business. She's brilliant at seeing opportunities I might miss. The weekly Sunday dinners became monthly, then sporadic. Brandon's language began to change, adopting Sophie's phrases. Maximizing wealth, aggressive growth strategies, thinking bigger. The son who'd once valued character over capital started talking like a corporate raider. Brandon's losing himself, I'd told Kevin one night after a particularly tense dinner where Sophie had criticized Kevin's outdated investment philosophy. I know. Kevin's face had been troubled. I'm watching it happen and I don't know how to stop it. Maybe it's just newlywed adjustment, I'd offered weakly. But we both knew it was more than that. 3 years earlier, the Thanksgiving argument remained burned in my memory. Sophie had openly criticized Kevin's overly conservative business strategy at the dinner table, suggesting that Davis Properties was leaving money on the table by refusing to leverage properties more aggressively. Dad built something stable, Alyssa had interjected quietly, always the peacemaker. That's not a bad thing. Stable is another word for stagnant, Sophie had replied with a condescending smile. Brandon had nodded agreement, and I'd watched Kevin's jaw tighten, the only visible sign of his anger. Later that night, Kevin had said, I don't recognize our son anymore. He's still in there somewhere, I'd insisted. Is he? Or did we raise someone who was always waiting for the easy path, and Sophie just showed him where it was? I hadn't had an answer. 2 years earlier, Kevin's heart condition was discovered during a routine physical. Arterial blockage, manageable with medication and lifestyle changes, but serious enough to force confrontation with mortality. Brandon and Sophie's immediate response should have been my final warning. Within days, they were asking pointed questions about estate planning. Sophie offered to help Michelle understand financial matters, since I'd never had to deal with business alone. The condescension was breathtaking, as if I hadn't been Kevin's full partner for 3 decades, sitting on boards, using my social connections to open doors that built his empire. We need to prepare for when Mom's alone, Brandon had said to Kevin during one visit with me sitting right there. Financial matters are complex. Kevin's response had been measured but cold. Your mother has an MBA from Northwestern and has been my business partner for 31 years. I think she can handle complexity. But the seed was planted. Brandon and Sophie saw Kevin's diagnosis as a starting gun, and they were positioning themselves at the finish line with their hands out. 1 year earlier, the breaking point came at Sunday dinner, one of the last before Kevin's condition worsened. Brandon suggested almost casually that Kevin should start transitioning leadership of Davis Properties to the next generation. You're not getting any younger, Dad, Brandon had said, as if 61 were ancient. Legacy needs succession planning. Kevin had set down his fork with deliberate care. Are you asking me to retire, Brandon? I'm suggesting we plan for the inevitable. You've built something incredible. I want to make sure it thrives for generations. And you think you're ready for that responsibility? I know I am. Kevin had studied his son for a long, uncomfortable moment. I'd seen something shift in his expression, the look of a man reassessing everything he thought he knew. We'll discuss this later, Kevin had said finally. But later, when we were alone, Kevin had turned to me with an expression I'd rarely seen. Profound disappointment. "He's not asking to earn leadership," Kevin had said quietly. "He's demanding to inherit it. There's a difference." 2 weeks later, Kevin called Charles Montgomery, our family attorney. Whatever Kevin set in motion that day, he'd kept it from everyone. Even me. Until now. I stood in Kevin's study the morning after the funeral, surrounded by the photographs and awards that told the story of his remarkable life. On his desk sat a framed photo of Brandon from college graduation, 15 years ago. The young man in that picture looked nothing like the calculating stranger I'd overheard discussing his inheritance while his father's body was still warm. My phone rang. Charles Montgomery. "Michelle, I hope I'm not calling too early. I've been awake since 4. I need to see you. Today, if possible. Kevin left very specific instructions, and the timing is critical." Something in Charles's voice, urgency mixed with something that sounded like anticipation, made my pulse quicken. "When? Can you come to my office at 10? This isn't something we should discuss over the phone." After I hung up, I found an envelope in Kevin's nightstand drawer. My name in his careful handwriting, sealed with a date from 3 months ago. I didn't open it. Not yet. Whatever Kevin had planned, whatever instructions he'd left, I wanted to hear them from Charles first. But standing there in Kevin's study, holding that envelope, I felt the first stirring of something I hadn't experienced since his diagnosis. Anticipation. Brandon and Sophie thought they were in charge now, thought they'd finally claimed what they'd been circling for years. They had no idea what was coming. Charles Montgomery's law office occupied 3 floors of Chicago's most prestigious downtown building. I'd been there countless times over the years for various business matters, but walking through those mahogany-paneled hallways that morning felt different. Everything looked the same. The oil paintings of distinguished former partners, the Persian rugs, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city Kevin had helped shape. But I was different. Yesterday I'd been a wife. Today I was a widow with secrets waiting to be revealed. Charles greeted me personally, as he always did, but there was something different in his demeanor. At 72, he moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd spent decades handling other people's most important decisions. But today there was an energy about him, almost excitement. "Michelle, thank you for coming so quickly." He led me past the reception area to his private corner office. "Coffee? Please." As he prepared drinks from an expensive machine, I studied his expression. Charles had been Kevin's confidant for over 25 years. If anyone knew the full scope of my husband's final arrangements, it would be him. He handed me a perfect cup and settled behind his massive oak desk, pulling out a thick folder marked with Kevin's name. "Michelle, what I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely confidential until the official will reading next Friday." Kevin was very specific about the timing. "Of course." Charles opened the folder. "Kevin came to me 14 months ago with concerns about Brandon's behavior. He'd noticed changes, the way Brandon talked about money, his expectations about inheritance, his attitude toward you." My throat tightened. "He never said anything to me. He didn't want to worry you until he was certain, and he was particularly troubled by Sophie's influence. He believed she was the catalyst for Brandon's transformation, though he acknowledged that perhaps she simply revealed something that was always there." "What did Kevin do?" Charles pulled out several documents. "He asked me to help him create what he called a teaching moment. He wanted to ensure that Brandon learned the difference between earning something and expecting it to be handed to him." He slid a document across the desk. "The will that Brandon believes exists, the one Kevin discussed with him during their business meetings about succession planning, was never Kevin's actual final will." My coffee cup paused halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" "The document Brandon has heard referenced, the one that would have made him primary heir to Davis Properties and a significant portion of the estate, was essentially a draft, a decoy. Kevin allowed Brandon to believe it was final." "Charles, what did Kevin actually do?" He met my eyes with an expression that was part sympathy, part satisfaction. "Kevin's actual will, the one that will be read next Friday, leaves Brandon exactly $1. The entirety of the estate, all $47 million, the business, the properties, Everything goes to you." The room seemed to tilt. I set down my coffee cup with shaking hands. Brandon will inherit $1? And a letter explaining why. Kevin was very clear about his reasoning. Charles pulled out another folder, even thicker than the first. He documented everything. 18 months of observations, recordings of family dinners and business meetings, financial analysis of Brandon's entitled behavior. All legally obtained, all admissible. Recordings? Kevin began using a recording device after his diagnosis. He captured Brandon saying some very illuminating things about his expectations for the estate and his assumptions about your role in managing it. Charles reached for his laptop. "Would you like to hear one?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. Brandon's voice filled the office, recorded at what sounded like a restaurant. "Once Dad's gone, we'll restructure everything. Mom won't interfere. She doesn't understand modern finance. We'll finally run things properly. Leverage the properties, flip some assets, get aggressive with growth. Dad's too conservative. That's why the estate's only worth $47 million instead of $100. Sophie's voice. "Your mother's generation thinks small. We need to think generational wealth." Brandon. "Exactly. Mom can keep the house and whatever she needs to live comfortably, but the real assets need proper management." Charles stopped the playback. I sat frozen, my husband's betrayal, no, my son's betrayal, echoing in my ears. "There are hours of recordings like this," Charles said quietly. "And there's more." He handed me an envelope. "Kevin left this letter for you, to be opened only after you learned about the will." With trembling hands, I broke the seal. "My dearest Michelle, if you're reading this, my heart finally gave out. I'm sorry we didn't get more time. Every day with you was a gift I never deserved. I've been watching Brandon carefully, and what I've seen breaks my heart. Whether it's entirely Sophie's influence or something that was always dormant in him, I can't say. But I can't ignore it. He sees you as an obstacle, not as the brilliant woman who built this empire beside me. He expects inheritance as a right rather than understanding it's a privilege that must be earned. I'm leaving everything to you, not to punish Brandon, but to give him something I never received from my father, the opportunity to earn respect through his own efforts. To learn that character matters more than capital, I've set up what I hope will be a definitive teaching moment. Brandon will inherit $1 and a lesson about entitlement versus achievement. What happens after that is entirely your choice. You are brilliant, capable, and stronger than our son gives you credit for. Don't let anyone, not Brandon, not Sophie, not anyone, make you forget your worth. I love you today, tomorrow, and always. Kevin. I read the letter 3 times, tears blurring my vision. Even facing death, Kevin had been thinking about protecting me, ensuring I wouldn't be left vulnerable to our son's greed and entitlement. There's more, Charles said gently. Kevin predicted that Brandon would likely make financial commitments immediately after the funeral, assuming he had access to unlimited resources. He wanted you to observe Brandon for 1 week before the will reading, to let him show you who he really is when he believes he's won. Why? Because Kevin believed, and I agree, that you needed to see the full extent of Brandon's transformation without any doubt. Every assumption he makes, every plan he develops based on wealth he'll never inherit, will make the lesson more definitive. I thought about Brandon's words at the funeral, his casual dismissal of my intelligence, his assumption that I needed his guidance. What happens at the will reading? That depends on how Brandon and Sophie react. If they accept the situation gracefully, demonstrate genuine remorse, you'll have complete discretion about providing support. If they fight it, Charles shrugged. Kevin made sure you'd have the resources and documentation to defend yourself. And the business? Davis Properties is yours completely. Kevin restructured everything over the past 6 months. You're the sole owner, with full authority over management and succession. If Brandon wants to continue in his role, he'll have to answer to you. The implications were staggering. Not only would I inherit everything, but I would have complete control over Brandon's professional future. Charles, this is overwhelming. I know, but Kevin trusted you to handle it. And Michelle? Charles leaned forward. He was right to trust you. You've always been stronger than anyone gave you credit for. I stood, legs unsteady, mind reeling with revelations. 1 week of observation? 1 week. Watch what Brandon does when he thinks he holds all the power. Then decide what kind of lesson he needs to learn. As I left Charles's office, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Kevin's diagnosis. Purpose. For the next week, I would play the helpless widow, and Brandon would reveal exactly who he'd become. Then on Friday, he'd discover that his mother had been playing chess while he was playing checkers. The game had begun. Brandon called at 8 the next morning, his voice carrying that familiar patronizing warmth he'd adopted over the past few years. "Mom, how are you feeling? Did you sleep at all?" "Not much," I admitted truthfully. "The house feels so empty." "That's exactly what Sophie and I were talking about. Listen, we'd like to come over this afternoon. Help you start sorting through some of Dad's things, and maybe we could discuss some practical matters?" Practical matters. Code for, let's talk about money. "That would be wonderful, sweetheart. I've been staring at your father's desk all morning, not knowing where to begin. There are so many papers, so many accounts I don't understand." The relief in Brandon's voice was audible. "Don't worry about any of that. Sophie's really good with financial stuff. She can help you make sense of everything." The irony was delicious. Sophie, who hadn't worked in 4 years, was going to help me. The woman with an MBA from Northwestern who'd been Kevin's business partner for 3 decades, understand finances. That's so thoughtful. I honestly don't know what I'd do without you both. "You'll never have to find out, Mom. We're family." After hanging up, I spent an hour carefully arranging Kevin's study to look like I'd attempted to organize his papers but had become overwhelmed. Documents scattered across his desk, file drawers half open, a box of tissues prominently placed. The scene needed to suggest a woman who'd tried to tackle her husband's affairs, but quickly realized she was in over her head. Brandon and Sophie arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, both dressed casually but expensively. Brandon wore a cashmere sweater I'd given him 2 Christmases ago. Sophie looked like she was heading to a country club luncheon in designer jeans and a silk blouse that probably cost more than most people's weekly grocery budget. "Mom, you look exhausted." Brandon embraced me, and for a moment, just a moment, I remembered the son who used to hug me like he meant it. "Are you eating enough?" "Not really. Food doesn't seem to matter much right now." Sophie's eyes were already scanning the room, cataloging, calculating. "Oh, Michelle, you shouldn't be dealing with all this alone." She gestured toward Kevin's study. "Financial matters can be so overwhelming, especially when you're grieving." I let my shoulders sag slightly. "I tried to start going through his papers this morning, but it's all so complicated. Your father handled everything." "Well, that's why we're here." Brandon was already moving toward the study, his fingers hovering over the deliberately chaotic paperwork. "Dad always said family takes care of family." I followed them, watching as their eyes swept over the scene I'd created. Brandon went straight to the desk, examining the financial statements I'd strategically placed on top. "Mom, have you talked to Charles Montgomery yet? About the will?" "Briefly. He said we'd meet next week to go over everything formally." I twisted my hands together, the picture of anxiety. "But Brandon, I'm so worried. I don't know what I'm going to do. Your father never really explained the business side of things to me." The relief on their faces was almost comical. Sophie actually smiled before catching herself and rearranging her expression into appropriate concern. "You won't be alone," Sophie said, settling into the chair across from Kevin's desk as if she belonged there. "We'll help you figure everything out." "Do you really think you could? I mean, I know you're both so busy with your own lives." "Mom, we're talking about family legacy here." Brandon picked up one of the financial statements, his eyes sharp with interest. "Dad built something incredible, and we need to make sure it's protected." "Protected from what?" Brandon exchanged a glance with Sophie before answering. "Well, from bad decisions. From people who might try to take advantage of your grief. From complications." "What kind of complications?" "Estate taxes, business management, investment decisions," Sophie said smoothly. There are a lot of vultures out there who prey on widows, especially wealthy ones. You need people you can trust to guide you. People like us, Brandon added. We know Dad's business. We understand the family finances, and we love you. Who better to help you navigate all of this? I let my expression soften with apparent relief. I've been so worried about making the wrong choices. Your father always said I was too trusting, that I needed to be more careful. Dad was right about that, Sophie said. But that's why you have Eric and me. We'll make sure no one takes advantage of you. The casual way she included herself in my family, as if she had any claim to Kevin's legacy beyond her marriage certificate, was breathtaking in its audacity. I can't tell you how much better I feel knowing you'll help me. I paused, then added tentatively, Brandon, you mentioned something about investments. Brandon's eyes lit up. Actually, yes. I've been researching some opportunities. High-yield investments that could significantly multiply Dad's wealth. Once we understand the full scope of the estate, there are some really exciting possibilities. Like what? Well, there's a luxury real estate development in Miami, high-end condos in an emerging market. The projected returns are incredible. We could potentially double our investment in just 3 to 5 years. Double it? That sounds wonderful, but also terrifying. What if something goes wrong? Nothing's going to go wrong, Mom. I have inside connections to this deal. These aren't random investments. They're carefully researched opportunities. Sophie leaned forward. Michelle, Eric has incredible business instincts. He's been planning these moves for months. For months. While Kevin was dying, Brandon was planning how to spend his inheritance. Well, I suppose if you really think it's wise, trust me, Mom, Dad would want us to be aggressive about growing his legacy, not just sitting on it. We spent the next 2 hours with Brandon and Sophie walking me through their various investment ideas, each more expensive and ambitious than the last. A restaurant franchise requiring $8 million in startup capital. A tech company revolutionizing social media that needed $5 million to secure equity. A warehouse conversion project worth $2.8 million. By the end of the afternoon, they had theoretically spent over $15 million of what they thought was their inheritance. This is all so exciting, I said as they prepared to leave. I never realized there were so many opportunities out there. That's because Dad was conservative in his thinking, Brandon said. He did great for his generation, but our generation understands different strategies for wealth building. I'm just grateful you're willing to take this on. I don't know what I would have done without you. You'll never have to find out, Sophie said, leaning down to embrace me. We're going to take such good care of you and the estate. After they left, I poured myself a glass of Kevin's best scotch and sat in his study, laughing until tears ran down my cheeks. In 3 hours, my son and his wife had revealed themselves completely. They saw me as a helpless, bumbling widow who needed their superior guidance. Meanwhile, they were planning to gamble away a significant portion of the inheritance on risky investments and luxury purchases. The beautiful irony was that while they thought they were protecting the estate from my poor judgment, they were actually revealing their own complete lack of wisdom and restraint. The rest of the week followed a predictable pattern. Brandon called daily with updates on his investment plans, each conversation revealing new layers of his entitlement and financial recklessness. On Tuesday, he mentioned he'd already reserved spots in the Miami real estate development and the restaurant franchise, putting down deposits he described as just holding our place in line. How much were the deposits? I'd asked carefully. Only about $50,000 total. Nothing major in the scope of Dad's estate. $50,000. Money Brandon didn't actually have access to yet, spent on investments that existed only in his imagination. Wednesday brought a visit from Sophie, ostensibly to check on me, but actually to show me iPad presentations of their investment portfolio. She'd clearly been working on this for days, perhaps weeks. Slick graphics, projected returns, testimonials from satisfied investors. We're talking about $12 million in initial investments, Sophie had said, her eyes gleaming. But the potential returns could triple the estate value in 3 years. Where would you get $12 million? Sophie had laughed, the sound sharp and condescending. Michelle, that's less than a quarter of the estate value. It's a reasonable investment for someone with Kevin's level of wealth. On Thursday, I had lunch with Margaret Ashford at her country club. Over Caesar salads and white wine, Margaret shared some interesting gossip. Darling, I hope this doesn't upset you, but I thought you should know. Sophie's been telling people that you're overwhelmed and out of your depth with Kevin's business affairs. Has she? She's positioning herself and Brandon as the responsible adults stepping in to manage things. A few of us are concerned. Concerned how? Margaret chose her words carefully. Brandon's always been ambitious, but lately there's something different, more aggressive. Sophie mentioned at Bridge last week that they're planning some major investments immediately, multiple millions. It seems hasty. I'd planted the seeds I needed. By Friday, word would spread through our social circle that Brandon was making risky financial commitments with unseemly haste after his father's death. Friday morning brought the most revealing development. Brandon called, barely containing his excitement. Mom, incredible news. The restaurant franchise people called. They're so impressed with our financial profile that they want to fast-track our application. They're offering us 3 locations instead of 1. 3? That sounds like a lot. The investment would be larger, $8 million total, but the revenue potential is enormous. We're talking about building a regional empire. Our empire. Not his investment, but ours. Brandon was already thinking of himself as the family patriarch, making decisions that would affect the entire estate. I suppose if you're certain, I am certain. In fact, Sophie and I are meeting with their corporate team Monday to sign preliminary agreements. Monday? That seems very fast. That's how these opportunities work, Mom. You have to be decisive. Dad understood that. It's how he built his fortune. The revisionist history was stunning. Kevin had built his fortune through careful planning, conservative investments, and methodical expansion over decades. Brandon was describing the exact opposite approach and attributing it to his father. Well, I trust your judgment, sweetheart. There was a pause. Then Brandon's voice shifted to a more serious tone. Mom, there's something else Sophie and I have been talking about. We think it might be time for you to consider simplifying your living situation. Simplifying? The house is so big for just one person. The maintenance costs must be enormous. We were thinking you might be happier in a nice condo somewhere. Maybe that new luxury development downtown. Much more manageable for someone in your position. Someone in my position. A widow who needed her son's guidance because she was incapable of managing a large home or significant wealth on her own. I hadn't really thought about moving. This is my home. You don't have to decide anything right away, but the real estate market is hot right now, and the house would probably sell quickly for top dollar. The proceeds could fund some of our larger investment opportunities. The proceeds from selling my house, the home Kevin and I had built together, filled with 30 years of memories, would fund Brandon's get-rich-quick schemes. I'll think about it. Take your time. But Mom, Sophie found this great realtor who specializes in luxury properties. She could come by next week just to give us an idea of the house's value. No commitment, just information. After hanging up, I called Charles immediately. Brandon just suggested I sell my house to fund his investment schemes, and he's signing preliminary agreements Monday for an $8 million restaurant franchise. Interesting. He's moving faster than Kevin anticipated. Charles, can he actually access estate funds to cover these commitments? Not until the will is probated and inheritance is officially transferred. Every dollar he's planning to spend exists only in his imagination. Then how is he planning to cover the deposits and agreements? Either he's using personal funds, which are limited, or he's making promises based on money he expects to inherit, but doesn't legally have yet. What happens if he signs agreements he can't honor? Breach of contract lawsuits, damage to his credit, and potentially fraud charges if he misrepresented his financial situation. The magnitude of Brandon's potential mistake was staggering. He was so confident about his inheritance that he was making commitments that could destroy him financially. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done since Kevin's diagnosis. I called my daughter. Alyssa, do you have time to talk? Always, Mom. How are you holding up? Some days are better than others. Can you come over? I need your perspective on something." An hour later, Alyssa sat in my living room, her dark hair pulled back, her expression open and concerned. Next to Brandon's calculating ambition, her genuine warmth felt like sunlight. "What's going on, Mom? Have you talked to Brandon this week?" Her expression shifted slightly. "Briefly, he called to discuss the will reading next Friday. He seemed excited." "Excited? That's not the right word. Eager? Impatient? Mom, what's happening?" I considered how much to tell her. "Brandon and Sophie have been very helpful this week, offering to guide me through Kevin's business affairs." "That's good, right?" "Alyssa, sweetheart, do you think I need guidance to understand your father's business?" She studied me carefully. "Mom, you have an MBA. You've been Dad's partner for 30 years. You probably understand the business better than Brandon does. Then why would he and Sophie treat me like I'm incompetent?" Alyssa was quiet for a long moment. "Because it serves their purposes to see you that way. If you're helpless, they're necessary. If you're capable, they're optional. When did my son become someone who needs me to be helpless? I think it started when he married Sophie. Or maybe she just gave him permission to be someone he always wanted to be." Alyssa reached for my hand. "Mom, what's really going on?" "Your father left some surprises in his will, and I think Brandon is about to learn some difficult lessons about entitlement and consequences." "Good," Alyssa said firmly. "He needs to learn them." I dressed carefully for the occasion. A black Armani suit that was elegant without being ostentatious, Kevin's wedding ring on a chain around my neck, minimal jewelry. I wanted to look dignified but vulnerable, a woman still processing grief while relying on others to guide her through complex legal matters. The sky over Chicago was gray and overcast, threatening rain. Appropriate weather for what was about to unfold. I arrived at Charles's building 15 minutes early and sat in my car, watching Brandon and Sophie pull up in what appeared to be a new BMW. Apparently, they'd decided to upgrade their transportation in anticipation of their windfall. Brandon practically bounced as he walked toward the building, animated and confident. Sophie was equally energized, her designer dress and perfectly styled hair suggesting someone preparing for a celebration rather than a legal proceeding. They had no idea what was waiting for them. I entered the building several minutes after them, rehearsing my role one final time, appropriately subdued, perhaps confused by legal terminology, grateful for my son's presence and support. The receptionist led me to Charles's main conference room. Brandon and Sophie were already seated at the polished mahogany table. Alyssa and Ethan sat across from them, Alyssa's face carefully neutral. Brandon jumped up to embrace me. "Mom, how are you feeling? I know this must be emotional." "I'm managing, sweetheart. Thank you for being here." "Of course. We're family." He guided me to a seat between him and Alyssa, his hand on my shoulder possessive and patronizing. Sophie offered a sympathetic smile. "Michelle, whatever the will says, we'll figure everything out together." Charles entered with his associate and Kevin's sister, Diane, who'd flown in from Boston. Diane caught my eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. She knew what was coming. Kevin had told her months ago. "Thank you all for coming," Charles began, settling at the head of the table. Both men carried leather portfolios containing the documents that would change all our lives. "Before we begin, let me explain the process. I'll read the will in its entirety, then answer questions. The document has been properly witnessed and notarized. All legal requirements have been met." Brandon nodded eagerly, his confidence absolute. Charles opened his portfolio and removed a thick document bound in blue legal backing. "This is the last will and testament of Kevin Michael Davis, executed on August 15th of last year." August 15th. 14 months ago, just after Kevin's diagnosis. The timing wasn't lost on me. I'll begin with the preliminary statements, then move to specific bequests. Brandon leaned forward, his attention laser-focused on Charles's words. "I, Kevin Michael Davis, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." Standard legal language. Brandon relaxed slightly. First, I want to express my profound love for my wife, Michelle, who has been my true partner in every sense of the word. Everything I built with her support, her wisdom, and her unwavering dedication to our family and our shared dreams. I felt tears prick my eyes at Kevin's words. Across the table, I saw Brandon smile slightly, probably interpreting it as touching but irrelevant sentiment before the real business began. Second, I want to acknowledge my children. To my daughter Alyssa, who has shown me what it means to build a meaningful life focused on service rather than wealth, who has never asked for anything beyond love and support. Alyssa's eyes filled with tears. Ethan squeezed her hand. And to my son Brandon, who has shown me much about the difference between earning something and expecting it, between building a legacy and inheriting one. Brandon's smile faltered slightly at the subtle edge in those words, but he maintained his confident posture. Charles continued reading through the preliminary statements. Kevin's gratitude to friends and colleagues, his wishes for a simple burial, his pride in what he'd accomplished. Then Charles paused, took a breath, and looked directly at Brandon. Now the specific bequests. The room went absolutely silent. To my beloved wife, Michelle Davis, I leave the entirety of my estate, including but not limited to all real property, all business interests in Davis properties and subsidiary companies, all investment accounts and portfolios, all personal property, and all liquid assets. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Brandon's face went blank with confusion. Sophie's mouth opened slightly in shock. This includes full ownership of Davis properties with complete operational authority, the family residence and all vacation properties, all vehicles, all art and collectibles, and all bank accounts, retirement funds, and investment holdings. Wait, Brandon's voice cracked. What's left for? I'm not finished, Charles said firmly. To my son Brandon Davis, I leave the sum of $1 to be paid from petty cash. The silence that followed was deafening. Sophie's face cycled through confusion, shock, and dawning horror. Brandon stared at Charles as if he'd spoken in a foreign language. $1? Brandon's voice was barely a whisper. That's not possible. Dad promised me. We discussed succession planning. He said, "There's more," Charles interrupted and continued reading. I make this bequest to Brandon not from cruelty, but from love. For 2 years, I have watched my son demonstrate that he values inheritance over achievement, entitlement over effort, and wealth over wisdom. I have seen him treat his mother, my beloved partner, with disrespect and condescension, assuming that her grief would make her vulnerable to manipulation. Brandon shot to his feet. This is insane. He can't have written this. Someone influenced him. Someone changed his mind. He turned to me, his eyes desperate. Mom, you have to contest this. This isn't what Dad wanted. This isn't— Sit down, Brandon, Diane said sharply, her retired judge's authority cutting through his panic. Let Charles finish reading your father's words. Brandon sank back into his chair, his face pale, his hands shaking. I leave Brandon $1 as a reminder that love must be earned, respect must be demonstrated, and family loyalty is a two-way street. If my son wishes to build wealth, he can do so as I did, through hard work, smart decisions, and personal sacrifice rather than inheritance and entitlement. Charles set down the will and picked up another document. Kevin anticipated that this will might be contested. He prepared extensive documentation to support his decision. What kind of documentation? Sophie's voice was sharp with barely controlled panic. Recordings of conversations where Brandon discussed his inheritance expectations. Copies of financial commitments made in anticipation of wealth he didn't legally possess. Testimony from multiple witnesses about his treatment of Michelle during Kevin's illness and after his death. And a complete psychological evaluation proving Kevin was of sound mind when he executed this will. Additionally, Charles continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, I'm aware that Brandon has made significant financial commitments over the past week, totaling approximately $11.8 million. These include deposits on a Miami real estate development, preliminary agreements for a restaurant franchise, commitments to a warehouse conversion project, and investments in various tech ventures. Brandon's face drained of all color. These obligations are your personal responsibility, Brandon. You misrepresented your financial status to secure these opportunities. You face potential breach of contract lawsuits and possible fraud charges. Mom, Brandon turned to me, his voice raw with desperation. You can fix this. You inherited everything. You can give me what Dad should have left me. You can make this right. This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating. My son was looking at me with the expectation that maternal love would override judgment and justice. I looked at Brandon, this man who had dismissed my intelligence, planned to sell my home without my consent, committed fraud by misrepresenting his financial situation, and treated me like an incompetent child who needed his guidance. I thought about Kevin's letter, about the choice between mercy and enabling. Brandon, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Your father's will reflects his assessment of your character and your recent behavior. I don't think I should override his judgment. What? The word came out strangled. Mom, I'm your son. I'm your only son. You can't seriously be considering— You're not being left with nothing, I interrupted. You're being left with the opportunity to prove yourself worthy of respect through your own efforts rather than your birthright. That's what your father wanted for you. Sophie leaned across the table, her carefully constructed mask finally cracking. Michelle, you need to think about this carefully. Brandon is your family. Blood is thicker than water. Sophie, I said, meeting her eyes directly. Over the past week, you and Brandon have made it very clear that you consider yourselves to be in charge of this family's wealth. You've planned how to spend it, how to grow it, how to use it to fund your dreams. You've treated me like an obstacle to your ambitions rather than the woman who helped build that wealth. That's not true, Sophie protested, but her voice lacked conviction. It's completely true. You've dismissed my intelligence, questioned my judgment, and assumed that grief would make me malleable to your manipulation. You even had Brandon contact realtors about selling my home to fund his investment schemes. Brandon's expression shifted as he realized how completely his behavior had been observed and documented. Mom, if we said things that hurt you, we're sorry. We were just trying to help. You were trying to help yourselves, I said firmly. And now you can continue helping yourselves, but with your own resources instead of mine. The silence that followed was broken only by Sophie beginning to cry. Not delicate tears of grief, but harsh, gulping sobs of someone watching their dreams disintegrate. Charles, Brandon said desperately, there has to be something we can do. Some way to challenge this. You can certainly hire an attorney and attempt to contest the will, Charles replied calmly. But I should warn you that doing so will trigger the release of all documentation your father compiled. The recordings, the financial records, the witness testimony, all of it will become part of the public record. In Chicago's business community, where reputation is everything, such a revelation would be devastating. How long do I have to decide? 30 days from today to file any contest. Charles paused. But Brandon, I strongly advise you to focus your energy on addressing the financial commitments you've already made rather than fighting a will you cannot win. Brandon looked between Charles and me, his face cycling through emotions, disbelief, anger, desperation, and finally, dawning comprehension of his situation. The Miami developers expect their deposit by Monday, he said quietly. The franchise company wants the first installment by next Friday. The warehouse people, the tech investors, they all have deadlines. His voice was getting higher, more panicked. I don't have that money. I don't have any of that money without the inheritance. Then perhaps, I said softly, you should have considered that before making commitments based on money you didn't actually have. Sophie stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is vindictive. You're destroying Brandon's life because of some twisted loyalty to a dead man's grudge. Sophie, Diane warned, I suggest very carefully considering your next words. But Sophie was past caring. Kevin is dead, Michelle. His petty grudges should be buried with him. You're alive. You have the power to fix this situation. And you're choosing to let your son be destroyed. Get out, I said quietly. What? Get out of this office now. Brandon grabbed Sophie's arm, finally showing some awareness of how completely inappropriate her behavior was. But Sophie jerked away from him. You're going to regret this, she hissed at me. When you're dying alone in that big empty house, don't expect Brandon to be there. Sophie, that's enough, Brandon said, his voice cracking. But I'd heard everything I needed to hear. In her desperation, Sophie had revealed the absolute contempt she'd always felt for me beneath her surface politeness. Brandon, I said, standing to face my son, you have a choice to make. You can continue to enable your wife's disrespect toward me and toward your father's memory. Or you can decide that family loyalty actually means something, but you cannot have both my support and her contempt. Brandon looked between Sophie and me, his face anguished. For a moment, just a moment, I thought he might choose differently, might finally see Sophie for what she was. But then he said, Mom, if you'd just be reasonable. I see, I interrupted, my heart breaking. You've made your choice. I turned to Charles. Please send me the estate transfer documents. I'll review them this weekend. To Alyssa, I said, Sweetheart, would you walk me to my car? And without looking back at Brandon or Sophie, I left the conference room with my head high and my vision blurred with tears I refused to shed in front of them. Behind me, I heard Sophie's sharp voice. This isn't over. We'll fight this. Ms. Davis, Charles said coldly. You and Brandon need to leave. Now. In the elevator, Alyssa held my hand tightly. Neither of us spoke until we reached the parking garage. Mom, are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. I just watched my son choose money over family, even when the money doesn't exist, even when his marriage is built on greed and lies. He chose Sophie over me. He'll realize his mistake, Alyssa said. When everything falls apart, he'll understand what he lost. Maybe, but by then, it might be too late. I drove home through the gray Chicago afternoon, Kevin's words echoing in my mind. What happens next is entirely your choice. I'd made my choice. Now Brandon would have to live with his. I learned about Brandon's disintegration through carefully maintained social connections. Margaret Ashford, Eleanor Richardson, and other friends became my unwitting intelligence network, sharing news with the concern of people who assumed I was being kept informed by my son. I wasn't. Brandon had called exactly twice since the will reading, both times demanding that I fix this situation before his life was completely destroyed. When I gently suggested he approach me with respect rather than demands, he'd hung up both times. The first public sign came when their BMW was repossessed from Sophie's spa parking lot. According to Margaret's manicurist, Sophie had caused quite a scene, screaming that it was a mistake, that her lawyers would handle it. The poor dear seemed quite distraught, Margaret reported over lunch. Of course, we all heard about the will situation. Most people are saying Brandon brought this on himself, making investment commitments before actually inheriting anything. The restaurant franchise lawsuit hit next, $8 million plus penalties. Brandon had approached every bank in Chicago, offering personal guarantees he couldn't back up, making claims about inheritance that were no longer true. When the first deadline passed without payment, the penalty clauses triggered automatically. Charles kept me informed about the legal proceedings. The franchise company has hired an aggressive collection agency. They're moving to garnish Brandon's wages and destroy his credit rating. And the other commitments? The Miami developers are pursuing breach of contract. Another $600,000 in damages. The warehouse deal fell through with similar penalties. Brandon's total liability is approximately $12.4 million. For someone whose annual salary was $100,000, I said quietly, was being the operative word. Davis Properties terminated his employment last week. That hit me harder than I expected. They fired him? Technically, he was terminated for cause. He'd been taking calls from creditors during business hours, using company resources for personal financial matters, and, this is the part that sealed it, He told a client that Davis Properties was experiencing ownership disputes that might affect contract delivery. My son had sabotaged his own professional standing. In trying to solve his money problems, he'd destroyed the one source of actual income he had. "What about Sophie?" Charles's expression turned grim. "She moved out 3 weeks ago, filed for divorce last Tuesday. She's claiming Brandon misrepresented his financial situation when they married, and therefore she shouldn't be liable for debts incurred based on false expectations." I shouldn't have felt satisfaction at that news, but I did. Sophie had finally revealed herself completely. She'd never wanted Brandon, only the lifestyle she thought he could provide. By month 3, Brandon had filed for bankruptcy, $12.4 million in liabilities against $48,000 in assets. His credit was destroyed. His marriage was over. His career was in ruins. And he still hadn't genuinely apologized. 8 months after the will reading, a handwritten envelope arrived at my door. Brandon's handwriting, careful and uncertain. I sat in Kevin's study for 20 minutes before opening it, my hands trembling. "Dear Mom, I know I have no right to contact you after everything I did. I'm not writing to ask for help or money. I'm writing because I finally understand. Losing everything Dad built, losing my marriage, losing my reputation. I blamed everyone but myself. I blamed you for being vindictive. I blamed Dad for being unfair. I blamed Sophie for abandoning me. But the truth is, I did this to myself. I forgot what you and Dad taught me. That respect is earned. That character matters more than wealth. That family means putting love above selfishness. I treated you like an obstacle instead of the woman who raised me with more love than I deserved. I let Sophie disrespect you and Dad's memory because it was easier than standing up to her. I made financial commitments based on money I didn't have because I felt entitled to Dad's success without having to earn it. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that the lesson isn't wasted. I'm starting to understand what Dad was trying to teach me. I've moved to Denver. An old college friend offered me construction work. I'm starting at the bottom, learning what it means to earn every dollar instead of expecting it to be handed to me. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. Love, Brandon. I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Then I called Charles. "What do you think?" I asked. "Is it genuine?" "Only time will tell. But Michelle, the fact that he moved to Denver without asking for your help, that's significant. He's not seeking rescue. Should I respond?" "That's entirely up to you. But if you do, I'd suggest keeping boundaries very clear." I didn't respond. Not yet. If Brandon's transformation was real, it would have to prove itself through sustained, changed behavior, not just words written in a moment of desperation. Through discreet channels, Charles had contacts everywhere. I learned about Brandon's new life. He'd taken a job with James Cooper's construction company in Denver. Starting wage, $18 an hour. He lived in a studio apartment, took public transit, and worked harder than anyone on his crew. "James says he's different," Charles reported during one of our monthly updates. "Never complains, never mentions his family's wealth, earns the crew's respect through actual work." More letters arrived, every 2 or 3 months. Brandon wrote about learning carpentry, about the pride he felt building something with his hands, about understanding now why Kevin had started in construction. He wrote about beginning voluntary restitution payments to the franchise company, $200 a month, not legally required after bankruptcy, but something he felt compelled to do. "I'm paying back what I can," he wrote, "not because I have to, but because integrity means taking responsibility for your mistakes, not just apologizing for them." Meanwhile, I was building my own new life. I traveled extensively: Paris, Tokyo, the Mediterranean. I took art history classes, learned photography, discovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of being someone's wife and someone's mother. Dr. Patricia Wallace, my therapist, asked during one session, "How do you feel about Brandon's situation?" "Guilty, relieved, heartbroken, vindicated. I feel everything." "Do you regret the decision?" I thought carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. But no, I don't regret making it." Brandon was promoted to project manager. His crew was building affordable housing developments, homes for families who couldn't otherwise afford decent shelter. His latest letter included a newspaper clipping. Local Builder Wins Award for innovative cost-saving methods in affordable housing. Mom, I'm sending you something I'm proud of, not because I want praise, but because I finally understand what pride in achievement means. This project will house 40 families. For the first time in my life, I'm building something that matters more than my bank account. I completed my voluntary restitution to the franchise company last month. $1,800 over 2 years. It's not enough to undo the damage I caused, but it's a start. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. I know I destroyed your trust. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that your son, the one you raised with love and values, is still here. I just had to lose everything to find him again. I love you, Mom. Whether or not you can ever love me again, I understand. Brandon, I called Alyssa that night. Have you heard from Brandon? He calls every few weeks. We're rebuilding something. It's slow, but it's real. She paused. Mom, I think he's genuinely changed. How can you be sure? Because he never asks about the money, never asks about Davis Properties or the estate. He just wants to talk about his work, his life, how I'm doing. He asks about you all the time. What do you tell him? That you're thriving, that you're happy, that maybe someday, her voice trailed off. Someday what? Someday you might be ready to hear his apology in person. The call came from an unexpected source. Robert Hayes, a business rival who'd respected Kevin. Michelle, I hope this isn't overstepping, but I wanted you to know something about your son. My heart clenched. What about Brandon? I'm on the board of the National Affordable Housing Coalition. Brandon applied for a major grant, $2.3 million for a low-income development in underserved neighborhoods. I see. Michelle, he didn't mention his family connections, didn't try to leverage your name or wealth or his father's reputation. He earned the grant entirely on merit. His proposal was the best we received from 40 applicants. I couldn't speak. I knew Kevin, Robert continued. He'd be proud of the man Brandon's becoming. I thought you should know. After hanging up, I sat in Kevin's study, my study now, and cried. Not from grief, but from something that felt dangerously close to hope. Independent validation from someone with no agenda. Brandon had succeeded without using his family name, without shortcuts, without entitlement. I picked up the phone and dialed before I could second-guess myself. Brandon Davis? It's Mom. Silence. Then his voice cracking. Mom, I'd like to see you, if you're willing to come to Chicago. Yes, of course, whenever you want. Next weekend? Saturday morning? I'll be there. We met at a small coffee shop in Lincoln Park, neutral territory. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart pounding, hands shaking as I ordered tea I wouldn't drink. Brandon walked in at exactly 10 a.m. I barely recognized him. He wore simple jeans, work boots, a flannel shirt, clothes worn from actual labor. His hands were weathered and calloused. His face was leaner, older, marked by 3 years of genuine hardship. But his eyes were different, clearer. No calculation, no entitlement, just nervous hope. Mom, he sat down across from me, his movements careful, as if afraid I might bolt. Thank you for agreeing to see me. You look different, I said. A small sad smile. I am different. I had to lose everything to find out who I actually am. We sat in silence for a long moment. I studied this man who was my son but also a stranger, looking for signs of manipulation, for the entitled Brandon who'd dismissed my intelligence and planned to liquidate my life. But I only saw someone who'd been broken and had reassembled himself into something potentially better. Robert Hayes called me, I said finally. Brandon looked surprised. I didn't ask him to. I know. That's why it mattered. More silence. Both of us emotional, neither quite ready to bridge the 3-year gap. Mom, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish. I nodded. I'm not here to ask you to restore my inheritance or give me a job or provide any financial help. I'm not here because I think I deserve anything from you." "Then why are you here?" His voice broke. "Because 3 years ago, I told myself that wealth mattered more than family. And I need you to know that I was wrong. I need you to know that losing your respect was worse than losing everything else combined." My tears started falling. "Brandon, you broke my heart. You treated me like an obstacle. You let Sophie disrespect me and your father's memory. You chose money over love, even money that didn't exist." "I know, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make that right. Not with money or grand gestures, just by being the son you and Dad tried to raise." "What do you want from me?" The question that mattered most. Brandon met my eyes, and I saw only honesty. Just the chance to rebuild our relationship. No inheritance, no job at Davis Properties, no financial support. Just permission to be your son again, to call you on Sundays, to have coffee occasionally, to earn back your trust one day at a time. I looked at this man who'd been my arrogant, entitled son and saw genuine humility, hard-won wisdom, the possibility of redemption earned through years of changed behavior. I thought about Kevin's letter. What happens next is your choice. I extended my hand across the table. "Then let's start with coffee." Brandon took my hand, and the tears he'd been holding back finally fell. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you." We sat together for 2 hours, drinking coffee, talking about his work in Denver, my travels through Europe, Alyssa's children, everything except inheritance and money and the past 3 years of separation. We talked about the future we might build together, slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries and earned trust. When we finally stood to leave, Brandon hugged me, really hugged me, not the perfunctory embraces from before Sophie. "I love you, Mom," he whispered. I never stopped, even when I forgot how to show it. "I love you too, sweetheart." I never stopped either. Sunday dinner at my house had become a tradition again, but different from before. Brandon flew in from Denver once a month, always bringing flowers like he had as a child. Alyssa and Ethan brought their 2 children. Sometimes Diane visited from Boston. Sometimes my new partner, a university professor I'd met at a charity event, joined us. We talked about work and life and family. Brandon shared stories about his affordable housing projects with genuine pride. Alyssa talked about her nonprofit expansion. The children ran through the house that had been so silent for so long. No one discussed business or inheritance or money. One evening, as Brandon was leaving, he caught my hand. "Mom, I need to tell you something." "What's that?" "I'm grateful. For the will, for the lesson, for everything. I was destroying myself, and I didn't even know it. Dad saved me by refusing to enable my worst instincts. It was the hardest thing I've ever done, honoring his wishes." "I know, but it was also the greatest gift you could have given me. You loved me enough to let me fail, to let me face real consequences, to give me the chance to become someone worth respecting. You always were worth respecting, Brandon. You just needed to remember it yourself." He hugged me goodbye, and I watched him drive away in his modest Toyota, so different from the BMW that had been repossessed 5 years ago. Inside, I found Alyssa helping with dishes. "He's really changed, hasn't he?" she said. "Yes, he has." "Do you think you'll ever bring him back into the business?" I considered the question carefully. "Maybe. Someday. If he continues proving that he understands what Dad tried to teach him. That character matters more than capital. That respect is earned through actions, not inherited through birthright. And if he does, then maybe he'll have earned his place in the legacy your father and I built together, not as an heir expecting handouts, but as a man who understands the value of what we created." That night, I sat in Kevin's study with a glass of wine, looking at our wedding photo on the desk. "You were right," I told him softly. "The lesson was harsh, but it worked. Our son is finding his way back to the person we tried to raise." I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out Kevin's original letter, the one I'd read the day Charles revealed the will. I'd kept it all these years. a reminder of my husband's wisdom and love. You are stronger than you know, more capable than Eric gives you credit for, and more deserving of respect than either he or Vanessa have shown you. Kevin had known I would need that strength, had trusted me to make the right choices, even when those choices meant watching our son suffer the consequences of his own actions. I'd learned something, too, over these 5 years, that love isn't always soft. Sometimes it's tough and uncompromising. Sometimes it means refusing to enable destruction, even when every maternal instinct screams to rescue and protect. I'd lost my son for 3 years, but I'd gained back someone better, a man who understood that character is built through adversity, not comfort. That family loyalty is demonstrated through respect, not entitlement. That some lessons can only be learned through genuine consequences. And I'd learned that I was more than someone's wife or someone's mother. I was Michelle Davis, a woman capable of making difficult choices, building a meaningful life on my own terms, and loving without losing myself. The inheritance wasn't just Kevin's money, it was the wisdom he'd passed on, the strength he'd recognized in me, the lesson he'd designed to save our son from his worst impulses. And in the end, that inheritance, the one that really mattered, had been passed on successfully to all of us.